A little over a month ago, Bethany and I, along with three of our kids, sat in the Wildish Theater to watch the State of the City address. And at the very end of Mayor Van Gordon talking about some of his desires and vision for our city, my heart was, of course, more endeared to Springfield, just seeing what we have here. And I was grateful for that. They allowed all the council members to just say a word via video at the very end. And they started with Ward 1, 2, 3. And I'm like, I think our church is in Ward 5. I'm waiting for Ward 5. And so Ward 5 came up, and there's Victoria Doyle on video. And she begins to just say a word. And I so much appreciated her enthusiasm, her energy. And my wife and I are looking at each other saying, we need to meet Victoria. And it didn't work out for us to connect with her that night, but I sent her an email the next day, and she responded right away saying, I would love to meet. And so sure enough, within a week or so, we sat right over here in the fellowship hall in the sofa area, sat down, and just got acquainted. I wanted to understand her heart for the community, what lights her up, as well as a little bit of her story, her journey to where she is. And just so much appreciated, not only her energy, which I'd already seen at the State of the City address, but also just some of the values she holds dear. And just talked about the Lord and how God had led her and gave a testimony just with her walk with the Lord. And so I've invited her just to say a word to you. And I asked her this, could you just share your story? What did God use to stir you up for our community, as well as what do you see here? And so she's going to come up and just say a word to us, along with our series of just committed to this idea of good works. And so, Victoria, thank you for being with us tonight. You come on up here and say a word.
Well, I don't know if it'll be just a word, if you've ever heard from me. So, hi, my name is Victoria Doyle, and I am the representative for Ward 5, which is right where we're sitting. If you're not aware, City Council is made up of 6 wards and 1 mayor. And even though the entire city votes on all of the wards, I represent the interests of people in this area. So to give you an example, there's a concern that was going on up by Mount Vernon and some property that may be annexed. And those people were able to contact me, and then I could then be their representative. And that's the thing about being a city councilor, is our job is to answer to you, to the citizens, to my community, and to make sure that our government is doing what they're supposed to do and what you need and want them to do. Because let's face it, they don't always do that. And so I'll just give you a quick little, let me put my glasses on. I made some notes just so I wouldn't get off track too far. I was born and raised right here in Lane County. Was born at McKenzie Willamette Hospital. I went to Thurston High School, so I've been around here a long time. I lived in Cottage Grove for 13 years, but other than that, Springfield's been my home. I was adopted by a lovely Christian couple, and was dedicated at Willamette Christian Center, which used to be right where the fairgrounds are, and was raised in the Pentecostal church. So I knew these songs. I was very happy to know that I knew these songs. And so from the time I grew up, I was inundated with the Lord and with doing service and with being involved with my community. And my parents instilled in me a very strong work ethic. They basically told me that nobody owes you anything, right? All we get is those rights that are endowed by our Creator. They can't be given to us by man. They can't be taken away from Him. And you need to work hard for what you get in this life. And I really am grateful for that, because I did stray away when I became a teenager. I lost my way. But because of that foundation that I had, I was able to find my way back. And so I've been married 22 years to a lovely man, and we live right up the road. And my service started with dogs. I'm very much involved in dog rescue. I started in 2005. I got on a board of directors for a local shelter, and kind of went from there. Boxers and St. Bernards. In fact, I met the pastor's wife one day while she was walking her dog, and I'm like, oh, I had a St. Bernard. And around 2008, I was really getting unhappy with what was happening nationally in our country, and I was grumbling a lot about it. And so I started getting involved with politics in Eugene, and I am conservative. I'm unapologetically conservative. That is a very small group in Eugene. In fact, my friends that live in Montana asked me if we meet in a broom closet because he didn't think that there were any conservatives in Oregon. But I got more and more involved in that, and one day I was sitting at a restaurant in Cottage Grove complaining about something that the city had spent their money on, and a man who I found out later that was a city councilor said, well, if you're going to complain about it, you should probably get involved. Yeah, you're probably right. So he said there were openings on the budget committee. And I looked at the budget committee, and it was a very small commitment. But what it did was it gave me an opportunity to get in and see what the budget looked like. What are they spending our money on? How are they spending it? What are the rules around why they spend stuff? Because let's face it, we see that stuff and we're like, why did they do that? Well, I'm started to get more and more of an understanding of that. And I started to really gravitate towards that. And it wasn't maybe a year and a half later that city council had an opening, and there was one person running. There were 3 positions, and there were only one person running in each of those positions. So when you see only one person on the ballot, you get one choice. Do they represent your values or don't they? How do we know? They don't have to do any debates. They don't really have to talk to the community. They're in. And so this particular person, I believe, did not reflect the values of Cottage Grove citizens that I knew. And so I decided to run against him, and I actually won by about 68% of the vote. So I think that the community agreed that that was a better direction that they wanted to go, but it was up to them, and they needed to have a choice. And so I learned a ton being a city councilor there, met a lot of people, but I decided to move back here to Springfield because my parents were not doing well. They weren't physically well, and we wanted to be close to them. They lived in the nursing home up on 47th. And so we bought a house here, and unfortunately my mom had a stroke and passed away before we finished closing on our house. And within about 4 months, my father moved in with us. And so life just got in the way. I stopped being involved in politics because I had a family. I mean, like all of you, you have lives, you have jobs, you have kids, you have things going on, right? But then last April, I got a phone call from the mayor and from Mayor Lee Woodrow, who has held the position for Ward 5 for the last 10 years. And she took that position when her husband passed away, and he had held it since 1997. So this seat had been in the same family for more than 15 years. And I was very honored, but I also knew the responsibility. Cottage Grove is 9,800 people. This is 60,000. It was pretty intimidating. But once again, 3 positions, 1 person in each position. And I really feel like that as citizens, you need to have a choice. If it's not me, that's cool, but we need to at least have that opportunity to talk to these people that are running in these positions and make sure that they're representing your values. And so I didn't know that I wanted to do it. And so my husband and I took some time and we prayed a lot. And he was like, no, not again. Because he has no interest in doing it, but he supports me 100%. And so I did run, and I was in the only contested seat. The other 2 seats, again, the people could have got 1 vote, and they were in those positions. And so I guess what I would say to you in terms of positions is like right now, the budget committee is needing people. The budget committee is comprised of all of the counselors and the mayor, but then it's also representative of at least 1 person from each ward in the community. And we can barely get enough people to volunteer to do that. And it's like, it's this, I can't, and it's a minimal, you basically have 2 or 3 meetings and you give your opinions to the council on what they're doing. There's planning commission. But one of the ones that's really important, I think, to many of you, maybe you homeschool, but school boards school boards are positions that people just walk into them, and they are influencing our children. And I don't have children, but I see this, I want to use the word indoctrination of our children. And I say to you that it is vital that if you care about your values and what you want to see our community be, it's so important that we fill these positions. Springfield Utility Board, that those are elected positions, and usually 1 person just walks into those. And they make decisions on how much we pay for our electric. The planning commission, they decide what goes on in our community. These are all things that as people in our community, you have the opportunity to be a part of. And I know it's a lot when you have, like I said, you have stuff going on. We have our lives. But I see a change in our world. And a lot of us can't, there's not much I can do about Washington, D.C. There's hardly anything I can do about Salem. But I can affect what happens in this community that I live in, that I walk my dogs, that you raise your children. And I encourage any of you that if you're interested to even just try a little something, because we need you. I need you, and your community needs you too. And it's very rewarding. It's a very rewarding thing. You get to meet great people. Let's see. Anyway. I don't want to keep going on and on. I would love to answer questions if anybody has any. I have cards I can give you after the meeting because I definitely want to be available to you. A lot of times things come to us and we make the best decisions we can with the information that we're given, but we need your input too on those things. So even just watching the city council meetings and going, hey, that's kind of an interesting topic, you can log in online. You don't even have to leave the comfort of your home, right? So that's my message to you today, is to encourage you to get involved because this is where we live, and you need to be able to have a say in how it is and how it grows. That's it. Thank you.
So much appreciate you saying that. After meeting with Victoria, I just noticed she's mentioned this business owner and that person that she knows and that person. I'm like, how do you know so many people? She says, committees. I've just been on different committees over the years. And then she exhorted me. And she said, there's an SPAC position. And that had already come up in conversation. And Springfield Police Advisory Committee. And they're looking for a faith leader. And so based on her encouragement and some other factors, I thought I'm going to put an application in there. We'll see what comes up with that, comes there. And so I guess I'm meeting with the city council here in a couple weeks, is what Tiffany Monroe said. But we'll see what comes of that. But that would be something that Victoria encouraged me to be involved in, and just want to see what the Lord does when it comes to those kinds of opportunities. And afterwards, what I'm thinking is this. We're going to get into just the Bible for a few minutes this evening, and then after our service, I want to give you an opportunity to get acquainted with Victoria and ask her any questions that you might have. And probably one-on-one would be just more open than a public opening up the floor and so forth. So we'll plan on that right after the service, after we get into the Word. So for now, go and turn to Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. We've been in this series of good works for 7 weeks. We've covered the gamut. Start with Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. And from there, that was a springboard into several other texts. We look at Titus. We looked at 1 Peter. We've looked at, I think, Titus twice, if I recall. And now we're back in Hebrews and just going to look at one verse. Now, here's the background leading up to the verse I'm going to read. One of the apostles, it could have been Paul, we don't know for sure, was writing to some formerly Orthodox Jews who had come out of Judaism and believed in Jesus, but now they are being pressured to go back into Judaism and to keep the ceremonial law. And the writer here is concerned for them and saying, no, don't go back to the old life. God's made a new way for you. And the best thing about this new way of life is you get to do life together. And in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 22 through 25, it spells out what life together really is like when it comes to the Christian walk. And notice in verse 22, I'm going to pick up there and we'll focus on verse 24. Let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works. Maybe a good title for this whole passage is the word together. Let us appears 3 times. It doesn't say let you, let me, let us. And then, of course, it says, let's bring all this together in verse 25, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as ye see the day approaching. And so what I want to talk to you about in the time we have remaining this evening is, what does a culture of good works look like? Now, let me define the word culture. A culture would be the habits, the customs, the mindsets ingrained in a group that they don't even think about. They're not conscious of this. You know, a fish has a culture. And if you were to ask a fish, you know what water is? What's water? It's the only thing he knows. And that's how a culture is for us. So if somebody were to ask, what's the culture of Hillview Baptist Church? We got to think about it because we're in the middle of that culture. But one aspect that we are striving to grow in this year is to have a culture of good works, of engaging the community in a way where the outsiders would look in and say, hey, that's a beautiful deed that you're involved in. That's a contribution. That helps our community in some way. And of course, as we've already seen before, we're also trying to tell the community about Jesus and what He's done for us. So there's the visual as well as the verbal when it comes to the good works. So what does a culture look like? I believe verse 24 specifies what that culture looks like. And I want to use our imagination a little bit as I go through and even crack open a couple of these words that the writer uses here. Notice, first of all, that in a culture of good works, a church family considers one another. A church family considers one another. And when you look at verse 24, it starts by saying, let us consider. Again, not let me consider, not let you consider, but let us consider. And that word consider comes from 2 Greek words literally meaning to look down, to focus the vision upon. It's not talking about just glancing all over the place, but more of a focused consideration. And it's saying, focus your mind selflessly on one another. Paul wrote about this mindset in Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. And he said to the Galatian believers, bear ye one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Have a mindset of considering what other people are going through, not just your own struggles and what you're facing. Now, to do this, let's be honest. What is our default mode? Is it natural to just consider others? You know, Jesus was onto something when He said, love thy neighbor, what? As thyself. Because Jesus knew something. We already look out for ourselves naturally. He says, just like you naturally look out for yourself, look out for your neighbor, love your neighbor accordingly. And so in our fallen condition, we tend to look out for ourselves. We don't necessarily have to work at that most of the time to look out for ourselves. And so our default mode must be resisted. Now, Paul also wrote in Philippians chapter 2, verse 4 and verse 19, and made an interesting observation about this instinct that we have. He said, look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. He goes on later in the chapter, and he says, for all seek their own, not the things which are Jesus Christ's. Do you see that in our world today? People are caught up in their own lives, and other needs get neglected. And so having this mindset that is resisted so that we can be focusing on others is critical. Primarily, he's saying a church family focuses on giving and contributing more than taking. He's basically saying a church family is a culture of disciples, not a culture of consumers. Now, when I looked at this word consider, I couldn't help but think about a couple of my boys that love to go hunting. And when it's bear season or deer season or time to look for some elk, they start shelling out the money. And I got permission from my 14-year-old to use a vital tool when it comes to hunting. You got to have a good set of binoculars. And so I said, Micah, can I just use these tonight? Because if you're going to stand on a ridge and look for that black bear or the deer, you might see it from a distance. You got to have a periphery, obviously, when you're looking for that wild game. But if you see something moving off in the distance, you have to focus in on that. You have to consider where that is. What's its position? How does it turn? Can it hit the vital organs in the position where it is standing? Is it within range? And all these different considerations, but you're going from this panoramic view, and you're forgetting about your periphery, and you're focusing ahead on the target before you, first of all through your binoculars, and then, God willing, it doesn't move through your scope. And you get into crosshairs, and hopefully you get some venison and some meat that you get to enjoy as a family. But the idea is this: when it comes to considering one another, we come into a service, a gathering, and we look around, we have our periphery, and we're aware of maybe that need over there, and we notice, something going on there. We see all those kids and the noise they're making at the gathering place on the playground. But God calls us in considering one another to get the spiritual binoculars up and zone in a little bit and consider one another as far as where they are and what they're going through and what challenges they're facing. For example, you come in on a Wednesday night or a Sunday morning, and you have this eye to watch with this question: who's run down in our church? Who's struggling here? Or you look at one of the sisters who's raising the littles, or you're looking at a man who's working his 50-plus hours a week, and you notice she's kind of run down, or he's a little burned out, it looks like. And then you get the binoculars, and you just want to engage and look into this just a little bit more. You note that you might engage by asking and seeing how things are going, and then during the week you pray for that brother, that sister. You might even write them a note of encouragement, or offer to do some kind of service for them that would lighten their load, whatever the context might call for. But it all goes back to this one word: a church family considers one another. We watch out for each other. It's not just the leadership's job to watch out for the whole congregation. The whole congregation watches out for each other. So that's what the text is calling for. But then consider each other to do what? And here's a word in our English language that is accurate, but it can be misunderstood. And notice what it says: let us consider one another to provoke one another. Now, you siblings out there, you have a brother, sister, you know what the word provoke is. Because you're trying to do homework and you have another sibling that provokes you and is making noise or is being obnoxious. And that's what we think of when we hear the word provoke. But that's not what the word means here. It means to stimulate, to spur, to incite, to prod, to goad. Paul did this with a group of believers that had slacked in their giving in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9. There's the Corinthians. And he gives the example of the Macedonians, some poor people that exceeded the wealthy Corinthians' giving. And he basically says, hey, I'm giving you this example to provoke you to give. If they can give, then you can give. That word provoking, it means to encourage one another. It means to encourage one another. That's what a church family does, stirring them to action. But it also implies some level of discomfort. So if I'm considering one another where they are, and I'm going to prod or stir or encourage, by implication, that means that a person is here and they're going to be stirred to do action that is over here outside of their comfort zone. It implies getting out of where they are warm and cozy inside their bubble. Now, I go through this routine every single evening. And Victoria, you've had St. Bernard, so you know what I'm talking about here. We have our 130-pound St. Bernard named Shamgar. And he's about 9 years old, so he's getting up in years. You can see the muzzle and the gray forming. And so about 9:30, 10 o'clock, we're getting ready to just settle in for the night and turn the lights down a little bit more. But Shamgar needs to be let out because we don't want him barking at 2 a.m., needing to be let out. But by now, he is sacked out on his bed in the dining room. And so there begins a process of provoking Shamgar. As he's sacked out and he's snoring away, I always start by saying, come on, old man, come on, get up. He just grunts, doesn't even move. Come on, Shamgar. And I move his paw a little bit, and he moves his paw back. And he grunts some more. Like, the only way this dog is going to get up is if he is discomforted. And so inevitably what it comes down to is I start tugging on his bed and I start lifting it up a little bit so his paws start going up in the air. And finally he sits up and he looks around, his jowls shake, and he's like, who woke me? But then now he's just sitting there. He's not even getting up. And the process continues. And I try to nudge his paw. I try to lift up his bed a little bit more. And finally there's this long groan, and he raises his tail end first and pauses there for 2 or 3 seconds, and then comes up on the front too, and he's ready to go out. So finally, about 3 minutes later, he goes out, takes his pit stop, and he's good to go for the night. It's a nightly routine, but that's an example of provoking, of encouraging, getting somebody out of their comfort zone for action. And when it comes to this idea of stirring up one another, there are several ways of provoking one another in this biblical context. Number one is being a passionate example for those that are around us. When somebody has energy and zeal and heart, that provokes others. Have you been around somebody who is just loves being involved in a certain kind of ministry, or even a certain kind of hobby for that matter, or maybe they're passionate about exercise, and they're just gung-ho about their exercise program, and you need to be exercising. When you get around that person and they are on fire for their exercise, well, you feel guilty, like, I need to get exercising, huh? The same way with somebody is passionately in love with Jesus, and they're seeking Him, and they're praying to Him, and you get around that individual, that will provoke you in a good way. And by being red hot in your love for God, in your fervency for ministry, can provoke those around you. It can stir them up in a good way. Also, another way of provoking is affirmation, catching people in the very act of good or ministry and telling them what you appreciate about what they're doing. You're affirming them, you're provoking them to continue on in that way. Sometimes people do distance themselves and they get a little cold. Now, you don't come up and just start telling them what they do wrong, even though sometimes we get in frustrated and might feel like doing that. Rather, we approach that individual and we ask, how are you doing? Might be appropriate to express concern and point out what you observe, and then again ask if everything's okay. And see if they open up, if they talk about it, if they're willing to even admit the challenges that they're facing. It could be that they're overloaded with life or stressed out, or they're full of anxiety in what they're going through. But sometimes some loving correction or loving checking in is needed when you see a brother or sister getting a little distance. All this is part of provoking, example, affirmation. And sometimes some loving correction or encouragement can help a brother or sister get back on that high road. So a church family considers one another. A church family encourages one another. But to what end? A church family sees results together. And notice the twofold result in this verse. It goes on and says in verse 24, to provoke unto love and to good works. I love that word love. It's the word agape, the highest form of love. Not phileo, where it's just being a friend. Not eros, where it's erotic or sexual in nature, but love, I am going to seek another person's highest good. Because that's how God has loved me. He has sought my highest good. Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, Paul wrote, "For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty, only use not your liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another." Paul prayed for the Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3. He prayed that your love would abound yet more and more. If we don't have love, we don't have anything, according to what Paul wrote to the Corinthians. We're a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. We're just making a bunch of racket with no purpose or significance in that. So love is critical. We've already touched on that, what that looks like a little bit. But notice the next result, not only love, but good works. It's the same phrase that Jesus used in Matthew chapter 5. And that Paul used to Titus in Titus chapter 2. And that Peter used to the Asian believers in 1 Peter chapter 2. Same Greek words, same English words. Beautiful deeds. And it's basically laying out before this church family or the Hebrews saying, let's go and consider one another. Let's get the binoculars up and look at each other. But then let's be a stir stick and encourage. And to what end? So that love would fuel your beautiful deeds, not only within the church family, but also outside the church family. I love Galatians chapter 6, verse 10. Let us do it good unto all men, especially to them that are of the household of faith. In verse 25, he takes a step further with this vision. And I just picture an NFL game when the quarterback gets the guys around for their huddle. They're getting ready to go up to the line of scrimmage. And he gives them the plan. And he uses code lingo that none of us would understand what they are saying. And they clap their hands and say break, and they go up to the line of scrimmage. And in a sense, spiritually, it pictures the huddle here in verse 25 when it says, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is. So if it's saying, don't forsake, it's saying prioritize the gathering. Make sure you're there for the huddle so that considering, the provoking, the good works can continue on. Back in 1980, one of the most miraculous victories of all sports history took place. It was called the Miracle on Ice. Even if you're not a sports fan, you've heard about it. It's when a bunch of college-age kids representing the United States of America took on the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. The Soviet Union had won the last several Olympic Games in ice hockey. And now these college-age boys, not even professional, never playing in the NHL, the National Hockey League, took these guys on. And you don't have to be a hockey fan to understand the energy and the enthusiasm of their coach, Herb Brooks, because he knew the odds were stacked against them. But he had a pregame huddle with the whole team. And according to the Bleacher Report, who wrote, they published an article about this recently, Herb Brooks got the team together, and with fire and zest, he rallies his team with these words. Great moments are born from great opportunity. And that's what you are here tonight, boys. That's what you have learned. That's what you've earned here tonight. One game. If we played them 10 times, they might win 9. But not this game. Not tonight. Tonight we skate with them. Tonight we stay with them. And we shut them down because we can. Tonight we are the greatest hockey team in the world. You were born to be hockey players, every one of you. And you were meant to be here tonight. This is your time. Their time is done. It's over. I'm sick and tired of hearing about what a great hockey team the Soviets have. This is your time. And these college-age amateurs went out and they defeated the Soviets in one of the greatest upsets in history. Totally unexpected. But it went back to a coach that was willing to provoke them to do it. And they went out and made this happen. So as we bring this all together, here are some practical ways of playing a part in a culture of good works. Talk about your opportunities. If you have an opportunity to do good works, give God the glory as far as this opportunity. It's not a bragging time, but if God opens up a door, I would love to hear about it and rejoice with you as far as this door that God opens. Ask prayer for opportunities that God gives you. There's a needy neighbor. There are neighborhood kids that need a hub in your neighborhood. There are some seniors in your life, and you're wanting to reach out to those seniors. There's a retirement home or even a nursing home nearby where you're just burdened to reach out and minister. You got some kids to take goodies to them. Pray for that opportunity. Ask prayer for that in your Bible fellowship. Invite others to join you. Do you see a place where there are some young mamas hanging out with their kids, or maybe some young dads with their kids at a park, and you engage that park and you get to know them and you want to be friends to these young parents and enjoy their kids as well? Invite another mom to go with you. Invite another dad to go along with you in that. And then most importantly, just like Victoria did a little while ago, tell your story. So much appreciated her story with her upbringing and how she was burdened and got involved in Cottage Grove and came up here and is still involved in our community and just passionate about different aspects of what goes on in our community and wants to represent that Judeo-Christian value system. And greatly appreciate her zeal for that. But you have a story to tell too as you engage in good works. And tell that story in a way where God gets the glory. And as we do this together, we get to do something more impactful than what Herb Brooks did with a young U.S. hockey team in 1980. We get to bolster up a culture that plays a part in Springfield and the surrounding area that affects eternity. Because at the end of the day, we're not here just to bridge some gaps and make a friendship with somebody to make them feel good. Really, the end goal is not just to be on some committee where we help our community a better place. Now, we long for that to happen, but the end goal is that I can be in a place where I can be a light for my Lord. I can represent Him, and I can speak of Him as opportunity arises and maybe share my spiritual journey with someone, and might even have the opportunity to lead somebody to the Lord. And a culture of good works bolsters that up. So I want to stand together as we conclude our time. And I want to just ask the Lord to help us continue to work on this culture of good works based on Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24. And look forward to the coming days how God doesn't just use the leadership here. He uses you. And you become the real heroes of the culture of what God is doing here. And a great difference is made not only in Springfield, but in eternity. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you very much for the opportunity to gather together, hear Victoria's story on how she engaged more in community opportunities. And I pray that you would lead us in our pocket of the world to engage in people outside of our church family and forge meaningful relationships and get them the good news of Jesus as you open up doors of opportunity. For this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.